多分もう一晩でも食事をルネとしていたら食べる対象には考えたことはない。
He murdered her, ate her, and walked free. What if I told you a cannibal became a celebrity? In 1981, a Japanese graduate student committed one of the most horrifying crimes in modern history, and the law failed so badly that he never spent a single day in prison. This case isn't just about a murder. It's about how the justice system failed completely. In 1981, in Paris, a young woman named Renée Hartevelt trusted someone she believed was harmless. She thought it was just another normal interaction, nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. But she never left his apartment alive. The man she met seemed quiet, harmless, and what happened afterward would expose one of the most disturbing failures of justice in modern history. Welcome to Malaika's Case Walks. Real horrors, real crimes. Issei Sagawa was born in 1949 in Kobe, Japan, into a wealthy and influential family. He was born extremely premature and suffered from severe health issues as a child, growing up physically fragile and socially withdrawn. Literature became his escape. But behind that quiet exterior, disturbing fantasies began at a very young age. Urges he later admitted never went away. Years before the murder, there was already a serious warning sign. While living as a university student in Tokyo, he became fixated on a tall German woman walking alone. He followed her to her apartment, waited until night, and then broke into her home while she was asleep. His plan was to take or cut off a part of her body without being caught, but the woman woke up, pushed him away, and escaped. Issei Sagawa was arrested by police and charged with attempted rape. However, he never told authorities about his true intentions, and the case was later dropped after his family reached a private settlement with the woman. He walked free, and the fantasies that led him there didn't stop. After moving to Paris in 1977 to study for his PhD at the Sorbonne, his disturbing fantasies didn't stop. They intensified. He later admitted that he would bring a prostitute home every night, intending to act on violent impulses. For reasons he couldn't explain, he never went through with it. But these encounters were a warning. His urges were growing stronger, more dangerous, and soon it would lead to tragedy. In 1981, one of those tragedies unfolded. The victim was Renée Hartevelt, a 25-year-old Dutch student studying in Paris for literature. She was intelligent, kind, and trusting, the kind of person no one would expect to meet danger in the streets. She met Sagawa as a fellow student, never imagining that the quiet, polite man she trusted would soon commit one of the most horrifying acts and expose one of the biggest failures of justice. On 11 June 1981, Sagawa, then 32, invited her to his apartment. He told her it was to translate poetry for a school assignment, but he had planned something far darker. He chose her for her health and beauty, characteristics he felt he lacked. At just 4'9", he considered himself weak and small, while she stood 5'10". He later claimed he wanted to absorb her energy. Once she arrived and began reading poetry at her desk, Sagawa shot her in the neck.
欲しいと頼まれたからお願いします。もちろん全部嘘ですけど、そういう、設定をしたんですね。で彼女も快くそういうことを疑わない人だから、読んで、僕が詩を選んで短編集ですから短編詩集で読んで彼女は読んだけどどうしてもやっぱりもう普通に話してる時はニコニコして話してて怖かったです本当に。それでも引き金を引いてしまいました。でずっと彼女は声をしてたんですけどピタッと当然その声が止んでまず前向きに机の上につぶせになってそれから椅子ごと後ろに倒れてきた。
He later said he fainted from shock, but he woke up realizing he had to carry out his plan. After Renee was killed, what followed was disturbing and beyond comprehension. Sagawa committed acts against her body that he later described as part of a long-standing obsession, like raping her dead body, like necrophilia. He performed necrophilia on her corpse, and he could not bite into her skin because his teeth were not sharp enough, so he left the apartment to buy a butcher knife. He consumed various parts of her body, eating her breasts, her face, her feet, her thighs, her neck, either raw or cooked, and he even admitted that he swallowed her down area whole because she was on her period at that time, and he did not like the smell of her menstrual blood. Over the next several days, Sagawa dismembered her body and engaged in acts of cannibalism, consuming portions while storing other remains in his refrigerator. He also documented what he was doing by taking photographs at different stages. As the remaining body parts began to decompose, Sagawa decided he had to dispose of them. He placed the dismembered remains into suitcases and attempted to dump them in a very large public park in Paris, but he had been caught in the act and he was arrested. The arrest shocked France and the world. Sagawa's father, a wealthy businessman, immediately provided a lawyer for his defense. After being held for 2 years awaiting trial, a French judge found him legally insane and unfit to stand trial. He was ordered to be held at a mental institution indefinitely. Psychologists later determined that Sagawa's motive was sexual perversion, meaning he committed the crime due to abnormal sexual urges, not because he was insane or unaware of what he had been doing. Soon after, he gained macabre celebrity in Japan through a published account of the crime. Meanwhile, French authorities, seeing the publicity, deported him to Japan. There, he was briefly institutionalized but declared sane, and with sexual perversion as his sole motivation. Because the French charges had been dropped and court documents were sealed, Japanese authorities could not legally detain him. Sagawa checked himself out of the hospital in August 1986, and he remained free until his death. The fact that a man who committed such a horrific crime and lived openly for decades caused worldwide outrage. Despite the horror of his crime, Sagawa's story was published in Japan, and he even appeared on talk shows, which is something unimaginable for a killer. After returning to Japan, Sagawa's life took a disturbing turn, not in prison, but in public eye. Between 1986 and 1997, he was frequently invited to speak and comment on his own crime. In 1992, he even made a cameo in an exploitation film, The Bedroom. He wrote books about the murder he committed, including Shonen A, covering the 1997 Kobe child murders, and even wrote restaurant reviews for a Japanese magazine. For some, he became a macabre celebrity, a man whose horrific crime seemed to fascinate the public. But his notoriety came at a cost. He struggled to find publishers for his writing and employment. Once he was nearly accepted by a French language school because the manager admired that he used his real name, but employees protested and he was rejected. In 2005, Sagawa's parents died, and he was prevented from attending their funeral, though he repaid their creditors and moved into public housing. He even received welfare benefits for a time. In a 2011 interview with Vice magazine, he said that being forced to make a living while being known worldwide as a murderer and cannibal was a terrible punishment. In 2013, Sagawa was hospitalized from a cerebral infarction, which permanently damaged his nervous system. He later lived alone and required daily assistance, provided by his younger brother or caregivers. At that time, he claimed to have regretted the obsession that had defined his life. Sagawa ultimately died from complications of pneumonia at a hospital in Tokyo on 24 November 2022, at the age of 73. The fact that a man who had committed such a horrific crime lived openly, gained celebrity, and eventually died free caused worldwide outrage, and it remains one of the most disturbing failures of justice in modern history. The question that still haunts people today is simple. How could Sagawa commit such a horrific crime and never face prison? The French court found him legally insane, which meant he was unfit for trial. Yet he spent only 2 years in a mental institution before being deported to Japan. When Japanese authorities reviewed the case, they discovered the French files were sealed, so legally they couldn't detain him. In other words, a man who killed, mutilated, and cannibalized a fellow young, innocent student walked free. Not because the law didn't see the crime, but because bureaucracy and loopholes made it impossible to punish him. This shocking reality raises uncomfortable questions. How could a justice system fail so badly and completely? How could someone like Issei Sagawa live openly, work, and even gain public attention? He walked free, wrote books about his crime, appeared on TV, and even lived independently despite the horror of what he had done. The world couldn't believe it. I can't believe it. And maybe that's what makes it so terrifying. Think about it, a man capable of committing such unthinkable acts living openly for decades, while the memory of his victim, that poor woman, fades into history for most people. This is a story that forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How do we measure justice? How does society handle a man who is dangerous but legally insane? And what responsibility do we have to victims when the system fails us so completely? Sagawa's life is a chilling reminder that crime and consequences are not always aligned, that evil can sometimes escape punishment, and that human fascination with the macabre can blur the line between outrage and curiosity. In the end, René Hardevel's life was taken far, far too soon. That man lived for decades after the crime, unpunished and free. We let a man that commits such unthinkable crime live to the age of 73 while that woman's life was brutally taken? And the world is left grappling with one of the most disturbing failures of justice. It's a story that is both horrifying and unforgettable, one that shocks, haunts, and angers anyone who learns about this case.